Hello, hello, welcome back to Loki's Librarian. If you are new here, welcome. I am your librarian, Katrina, and on Sundays I do a thing called Books and Booze where I review a book and mix up a cocktail. This month I am looking at other ways government could work, or in the case of this week's book, some of the flaws with the current Constitution, making this week's book of the week, No Treason, The Constitution of No Authority by Lysander Spooner. I was not aware that this was such a bold choice after the election we just had. I know that there are people who are sadly going to read this and go, or hear this and go, oh, yeah, hey, she's right. Well, probably not. And we'll get back to this. And it's not she, it's he, because Lysander Spooner is the one who wrote this. The accompanying cocktail is called A Taste of Treason. It goes right into this. It is 1 ounce of Rye Whiskey, 1 ounce of Aperol, and 1 ounce of White Vermouth, 3 dashes of orange bitters, and orange peel for garnish. So let's do this. All 111, right? 111. Now, before I get into the book itself, I wanted to provide a very brief biography of Lysander Spooner. Because he is not somebody who hits most people's radar as anybody of importance, but this is actually a not inconsequential book for a variety of reasons. Cocktail mixer is way over there, and I need it to be right there. Lysander Spooner was a 19th century early abolitionist. I mean, he definitely did not believe in slavery. He thought it was an absolute travesty that it had been encoded in the U.S. Constitution. He was a lawyer. He was an anarchist. Apparently in the Boston tradition, which according to Wikipedia, I didn't dig too deep into that because I just don't care. If I had to guess, the Boston tradition has a lot to do with the Irish, the IRA. I have a book on the way about that. I might come back to that. We'll come back to that one eventually. He was born in 1808. He died in 1887. So he lived to see and through the absolute horrors of the American Civil War. And bless him, he however much he despised slavery, he was ideologically consistent in maintaining absolute rights and what the Constitution could and could not do. He wrote in 1845, so, my God, 20 years before the Civil War, 15 years before the Civil War kicked off in 61, he wrote The Unconstitutionality of Slavery. So he was definitely ahead of his time there. And then in 1867, just 2 years after the war had ended, he wrote No Treason, which explains why the North was wrong for fighting the Civil War. Isn't that interesting? I mean, you would think a man who was absolutely against slavery would be all for a war that ends slavery. Well, that's because the Civil War was not fought to end slavery. And there's ample evidence to support that statement. I have to get my 3. It's not a very long review because it's not a very long book. The book is 126 pages, so let me get my cocktail here. Of strong dashes of bitters and stir this up. Well, that is an absolutely gorgeous orange color. Looks a bit like Fanta, although, less fizzy. What I'm going to do with the orange peel here, I'm going to end up with a bunch of little peels. Didn't do anything fancy. We're just going to throw a chunk of orange peel in there. Call it good for garnish. So yeah, the North was wrong, which is a damn bold stance to take while the country's wounds were still raw. Andrew Johnson is battling Congress, trying to get concessions for the states as they rejoin the Union. So arguing that the war was unjust was an interesting move for that day and time. It's got a little bit of a kick to it. Good. It's good. The orange is definitely there. The Aperol balances out the whiskey very nicely. Rye whiskey can be a bit bitter, and the Aperol kind of balances that out. Aperol tends to be a bit sweeter, I think. Am I right on that, or am I thinking of the vermouth? Is Aperol a bitterant? Let's test this. Aperol's sweet. I was right. It is the Aperol that's making it sweet. Okay. Why would he take such a controversial stance at such a fraught time in U.S. history? Well, I mean, much like former President John Tyler, Spooner had actually read the Constitution, and he understood it. He was a lawyer. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of our Congress critters and presidents have been lawyers. Doesn't mean they've all read the Constitution. He actually did. And he put his legal mind to that, and he understood it. And he understood that without having actually signed their names to the contract implied therein, the men who fought for the South were incapable of committing treason because they had actually agreed to nothing. And this is a point, incidentally, that remains valid today. There is a reason that when our armed forces are inducted, they swear an oath to defend and uphold the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So, incidentally, do our Congress critters and the President. This is an oath they all take. The oath of office is Here, I will screen capture the text and put it there. They all swear this. You know who doesn't swear that oath? You and me. The common people, we the people. Which kind of begs the question, who are the domestic enemies that they're so worried about? Well, Spooner argues only those who have physically signed the Constitution or a copy thereof, valid copy thereof, can be bound to it as a contract. And says literally no one has signed the Constitution, not even the people who wrote it, believe it or not. No one is actually bound to its dicta. And he makes that argument citing Old English law, which is valid. I mean, most of our law, except for Louisiana, which is based on French law, believe it or not, it is tied to Old English law for good reason, right? I mean, the founding fathers were by and large English. So in Old English law, even if you could not read or write, you were required to make your mark on a contract for it to be valid. And that was usually just an X, right? And without it, a person is not bound by the contract they're in. And in his introduction, Spooner comes out swinging, saying, quote, on the part of the North, the war was carried on not to liberate the slaves, but by a government that had always perverted and violated the Constitution to keep the slaves in bondage and was willing to do so if the slaveholders could be thereby induced to stay in the Union. And that's entirely accurate. Abolition of slavery did not enter the equation until after Lincoln produced the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed the slaves only in states that were rebelling, protecting the institution of slavery in the states that remained in the North, namely Delaware, Kentucky, Maryland, and Missouri. These 4 states retained their slaves all the way up until the passage and adoption of the 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery, was adopted on December 6, 1865, a full 7 months and 4 weeks after the war had ended. So the war, by any metric, was not fought to end slavery. All right. Lincoln even quite famously said, quote, if I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that. Lincoln's sole goal was to preserve the Union. Slavery played no part in it until it was politically expedient to do so. So clearly the Civil War was not about slavery, it was about preserving the Union. So Spooner goes on to say, quote, the principle on which the war was waged by the North was simply this, that men may rightfully be compelled to submit to and support a government they do not want, and that resistance on their part makes them traitors and criminals. This is kind of like when you're walking down the street minding your own damn business, an officer tells you to stop and you don't, and so they arrest you for resisting arrest, even though you have literally violated no law other than not stopping because they tell you to. Right? It's an absurd law. Resisting arrest should really only be a thing if they're actually engaged in a lawful arrest. Like they have a literal warrant in hand for your arrest and you're trying to run. Okay, maybe then they could legally say, yes, he's resisting arrest. Anything else, why are the police stopping innocent people who are just minding their own damn business? New York had a whole lot to say on that one with the stop and frisk laws. He then points out that we are all, at this point, slaves, for we continue to live under a government that no longer serves us, but has instead made servants of us, slaves of us. They even steal from us weekly in the form of the income tax, although that would not happen until 1913, which is 26 years after Spooner died, along with the creation of the Federal Reserve, which Spooner probably rolled over in his grave when those two things happened, because he had very strong opinions about central banking in general, pointing out that that a not insignificant number of world governments are effectively owned by the Rothschilds, who bankrolled said governments, including the Federal Reserve, incidentally. He makes much of the idea of a secret ballot, which I kind of feel like he really missed the mark on that one. The ballots are secret so that we who do the voting can vote for who we want without fear of retribution or repercussion. The Congress critters, their votes on the bills being passed are very public. There are not supposed to be any secret ballots in Congress. And you can go online now and look up your representative and see how they are voting. Are they voting the way you want them to vote on any one bill? None of that secret. Now, he tied into this and it got a little jumbled, and I'm not sure if I agree with him. Basically, that if you do vote your ad hoc agree... Am I using that phrase rightly? Ad hoc. Hold on. I need to make sure I'm not... I need to make sure I have to edit this out or not. Yeah. All right. It works. Yeah. If you vote in any given election, you are ad hoc agreeing to the tenets of the Constitution and therefore bound by it. But he's saying no, that can't be the case unless you physically signed it. Not even swearing the oath is necessarily a thing, because who's to say if you actually said the oath, right? I mean, I get that that's the whole point of doing it, raising your hand in front of the flag when you're inducted into the military or sworn into Congress. But really, there's no proof, especially when they do them in mass, right? If it's a big mass swearing in, they don't actually go through and swear in all 435 members of Congress, plus 100 senators, and make them all swear individually out loud. And they do make the president swear out loud, right? That's the whole inauguration day. All right, I think Congress seats, on January 3rd. Now I have to check. When does Congress? Yeah, January 3rd of each odd-numbered year. So January, God, why do I remember these things? You would think by now things like that would have been pickled out of my brain. January 3rd, Congress seats. They're all sworn in en masse. No saying that any one of them actually said it. Versus if they signed the Constitution every time, if we had a massive database of signed contracts, Congress would be legally bound by that because they've now signed their name to it. The president says it out loud now in front of the entire nation, right? Because news cameras. So everybody knows the president swears the oath. But really, after that, it's just guesswork. We don't know if they actually said it out loud and promised to uphold the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I am well aware that people are going to be screaming, well, wait, Trump's an insurrectionist. He swore that oath and then he violated it. Well, if the shoe is now on the other foot, if you're so sure the election is stolen, wouldn't you do everything you could to prevent it from happening, from preventing that steal from being carried out? I mean, that's all. The argument legally could be made. That's all he was doing. He was concerned the election had been stolen, so he just wanted to make sure that the right person was being sworn in. It's an easy argument to make, and it's persuasive. It really is. And that shoe's now on the other foot. If you genuinely feel the election was stolen, wouldn't you do everything you could to make sure? Now, this is not to be taken as an incitement to rebellion, all right? Because even though I may agree with Lysander Spooner in saying, hey, I never signed the Constitution. I'm not bound by its tenets, and technically the Constitution exists to restrain our Congress critters, not we the people. The courts are not going to see it that way. Clearly. All right? So please, this is not an incitement. I am not telling you to do anything. In fact, I'm telling you don't do anything, because 250 years into this thought experiment called the United States, this is unquestionably the law of the land. It was a good thought experiment. I enjoyed reading it. The reality says the police will come and arrest you, and you will spend a very uncomfortable amount of time in jail if you act on this. So, just bear that in mind. So, Spooner already had strong opinions about central banking. The secret ballot, he kind of missed the mark. Votes are secret on purpose. Congress critters are not secret. They are not supposed to be secret ballots. The Constitution begins with, quote, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our prosperity, do ordain and establish the Constitution of these United States. So, Spooner says, the meaning of this is simply, we the people of the United States, acting freely and voluntarily as individuals, consent and agree that we will cooperate with each other in sustaining such a government as is provided for in this Constitution. The necessity for the consent of the people is implied in this declaration. The whole authority of the Constitution rests upon it. If they did not consent, it was of no validity. Basically, the people of the South had withdrawn their consent. And so the Union's war against the South was unjust under the dicta of the Constitution as it was written and agreed upon to be the law of the land. And that, incidentally, is what John Tyler saw. The consent rested with the people, and the people had withdrawn their consent. End of story. And because the United States has shown itself to be as prone to corruption as any other power-mad monarchy, we the people can withdraw our consent whenever we like, in theory. In reality, they will come throw your ass in jail for a few years until a more sympathetic president to your cause is sworn in and then hopefully pardons you all. Remember, though, when I read the book on Gerald Ford and I said the whole point of a presidential pardon is you have to actually agree you did something wrong? You don't get your day in court, but you're agreeing you did something wrong. Now, for someone like Ross Ulbricht, who's already been in jail for a decade, water under the bridge, man. Just take the pardon. If you haven't even had your day in court, you might want to swing for the fences. I mean, I'm not saying it'll be an easy road to hoe, but you swing for the fences. If you're acquitted, then all good. If you're not, Trump can pardon you later. Just saying, you might swing for the fences on that one. Of course, if you lose, then you're back in jail, and he might forget to pardon you. And if you win, it's kind of a Pyrrhic victory because you've already been in jail for, 4 years. Now, having said that, there is no way of guaranteeing a less horrifying result than that of the First Civil War. If you are stupid enough to feel you can insurrect against the government without repercussion, disabuse you of that notion. They didn't let the South leave peacefully once. They're not going to let any state of the nation withdraw peacefully. It will be violent, it will be awful, it will be bloody. The 4 years of the First Civil War resulted in between 620,000 and 850,000 dead. We still don't know exactly how many people died because there are casualties in there that are not necessarily battlefield casualties, like mass starvation because of no food. The slaves who were executed summarily by the South because they were slaves and they might have joined the North. So we don't really know how many people died in the Civil War. There's a lot more people now, and the weapons are exponentially more horrifying. So I would guess death tallies in the millions. Not one, multiple millions if America ever fought Civil War 2.0. So hopefully we never have to find that out, because it would be horrifying and dreadful. I know all the preppers think they're ready for it. You're not. The government can bring a truly horrifying amount of firepower down on we the people. And I get that we are, generally speaking, a well-armed nation. None of us have nuclear bombs, and there's no saying they wouldn't drop a nuke on their own people to establish their own authority. They were already willing to kill 500,000 of us 150 years ago. There we go. Spooner's point remains valid. We the people have to consent to the government, and that consent can be withdrawn at any time. And how you withdraw consent legally is the ballot box. Was it Frederick Douglass? I think it was Frederick Douglass who said there are three ways to change the government, right? The soap box, the ballot box, the bullet box. And you start with the soap box. And then you go to the ballot. God willing, we never have to go to the bullets. These are points, incidentally, that are no longer taught in school. I mean, I was taught it in school. We had to actually memorize the preamble to the Constitution. And notice I barely had to refer to my notes when reading it. I hope I didn't have to. I may have had to. I don't know. I'll know when I do the edit if my eyes are doing this, that I'm going to know that, yes, I had to read it more than I thought I did. But generally speaking, they don't teach these things in school. They have reworded it and corrupted it so that rather than teaching what's actually said in the Constitution, they paraphrase it for the 21st century. And that paraphrasing is an absolute corruption and bastardization of what the Constitution says. But no, they teach kids that the Civil War was fought over slavery, and that may be why the South withdrew, but that is not why the North declined to let them leave. It was very much about power and showing who has it, and it is not we the people. This book was an interesting read, and I think he does make some excellent points about consent and power. It very much reminded me of the book I read by Ari Mendelsohn, about consent, right? I mean, his book was fiction, but the point remains valid. It's consent of we the people. He does sidetrack with the ballot voting thing, secret ballots and whether or not that's a thing. And his rant against the Rothschilds, I mean, it's not a secret or anything, although it hasn't always been the Rothschilds that held the keys to the kingdom or the purse strings. I mean, there was that time that J.P. Morgan, not J.P. Morgan Chase Bank, but J.P. Morgan, John Pierpont Morgan, James Pierpont Morgan. You know what? I'll put it up here. But Morgan of Morgan Chase Bank bailed out the United States government entirely on his own during Grover Cleveland's second term. But it's absolutely true that those who have the gold make the rules, which is why Congress critters use their connections to make sure that they always have the gold. That's it for this week. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to subscribe. Stay safe out there. Please don't rebel. Don't do anything stupid that's going to land you in jail or get you shot by the police. And I'll see you guys next Sunday.